Okay, hello. So, welcome to Hunter's EU Fan TV. I'm Demi, and we're going to be going through my playoff prediction bracket. So, Overwatch League have had this playoff bracket in place for all of the tournaments that they've had, from main melee all the way through to the Countdown Cup. And they're doing so again for the Overwatch League 2020 playoffs. But this time they've put money on the line. So if anyone can get a perfect bracket, that means predicting match winners. Highest seeding also picks opponents for a lot of rounds. So if you can correctly predict what teams are going to pick which opponents, and also the grand finals map score, then you can win $100,000. You can also get $10,000 for having the closest bracket. So I had a go at this. I have done for all of the previous tournaments and have done for this playoffs. And we're actually just going to do a quick review of the entire brackets from North America, Asia, and the grand finals. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce every team, my thoughts on every team, as we introduce them into the bracket, and then talk about why I'm choosing each winners for whatever map, and why I've made each prediction that I have done in the lead up to hopefully winning $100,000. I would have done this if the money wasn't there anyway, but who knows if anyone's going to win this. I don't think that anyone will. There's going to be some crazy stuff happening. We'll see. But we'll start off with Round 1, which is starting on Thursday the 3rd of September, which is actually today as I'm recording this, and I'm trying to get this out before the match starts. But you choose match opponents between Houston and for Houston to either be against Boston or Vancouver, and then Washington to be against the other. Now, this was actually decided on broadcasts a couple of weeks ago. Houston decided to play against Boston Uprising, and Washington were therefore left to play against Vancouver Titans. So, Houston Outlaws are a team that has had good flashes this season, but also been very poor for large quantities of time. First 6 weeks or so, they were horrendous. They've had other periods, especially because of hero pools, they've really struggled to adapt to certain metas, or they've not had the right pieces to fit into certain metas, and they've just looked horrendous for those metas. They've been involved in the 2 worst matches of Overwatch I have ever seen, which was the aptly named Toilet Bowl from Houston and Boston at the beginning of the season. And then more recently, in the build-up to the Countdown Cup, Houston against Washington. Oh boy. And I have those negative thoughts in my head every time I think of Houston, is just how bad they can be. But they have shown good performances as well. This is usually when Dante can play a solo operator role on the DPS. Houston look best when Dante isn't expected to be consistently part of a team fight, but when he can flank off on his own and apply pressure to other teams from his own initiations. That was part of the issue that we had with the Genji meta, was that Genji was actually playing a vital key team role in that meta. He was using his deflect on halts to stop incoming damage, and he was very much playing as part of a team to burst down tanks alongside other players. And he had some good moments, but the fans really overhyped these good moments, and in actual fact he was a poor to mediocre Genji in my eyes. But he has popped off this season on the Sombra and also on the Tracer. These roles where he can really go off by himself and create initiations without relying on his team, where he can coordinate with his team to maximize on his own initiations, is really where he looks best, in these sort of solo operator flanky roles. And that's when Houston also look best. Now, his running mate for DPS is more commonly than not Linkser. He's a very experienced DPS player. He's played with Houston since Season 1. Has had incredible peaks particularly on the Widowmaker meta in Season 1, but he's also been missing for a lot of time. He is a very sort of streaky player where he's either going to come up clutch and like show you insane mechanical skill that will almost single-handedly win team fights, or he's just going to be part of the background for a lot of maps. He's also not showing up in clutch situations. This has been a problem with Houston Outlaws consistently throughout the season, is they haven't been performing in clutch situations. They've lost a huge amount of map 5s, which is part of why they're in the 10th seed, which shows that their standard performance is probably higher than 10th. It's definitely higher than Toronto Defiant, for instance, but they're not able to put in performances at the key moments that matter. They've struggled with their main tank role. Muma came in from Season 1. He's been a consistent main tank for them. Started the season poorly. He, I think, very much struggled on the Reinhardt metas, and playing so long in GOATs, and then this season starting off with the Reinhardt meta, we really didn't see the best side of Muma, which was, I think, his Season 1 Winston, and he's got a very strong Wrecking Ball as well. But I think he lost a lot of confidence on the Reinhardt and didn't look good through Houston's worst points, and he's not the sort of player who can pick that up and pick them up to be better. So we actually saw Hydration play main tank for large parts of the season for Houston, coming in for Muma, mainly because Orisa is one of Hydration's incredible heroes. Hydration was known for his flexibility back when we didn't have roll lock, and he was able to pull out Orisa, Roadhog, as well as his standard DPS. He had a very, very good Doomfist, for example. Back when he was with the Los Angeles Gladiators and then moved over to Houston this season. He's been mainly playing the main tank role for them. His Winston has been really poor. He still doesn't have an idea of what he's supposed to do, how he's supposed to engage, how he's supposed to peel, his cooldown management. I watched a lot of Hydration's Winston in those terrible matches against Washington, and it was clear he was out of his depth on Winston. He's shown some better looks since then, but he's not a main tank who's going to take much for you. On the other hand, Meko is a consistent, solid performer for Houston, exactly the sort of player they need, and has been solid throughout the season. I think he's been consistently their best player. Jexay looked like a carry at the beginning of the season, but has sort of dropped off after the Lucio metas were out of favour. But Meko has been the glue holding Houston from falling even further in the standings. He really has. He was a solid performer when they were performing badly. He's been a solid performer when they've been performing well. On the Sigma, on the Diva, I think he's got his Zarya probably isn't at the same level as the other off tanks in the league and within his own hero pools. But he's a very, very smart player, and he takes on the roles that he needs to take on as the flex tank. If it's the Sigma sort of holding down and taking more of a main tank role, or the Diva and being able to peel his engagements are very, very clean as well. And then Jexay and Repel are the supports of choice. There was a lot of issues with Repel or Raucus at the beginning of the season, but they settled on Repel and they look better for it. Jexay, I think, can be very, very good, but he's sort of petered off since his highs at the beginning of the season, and they don't have a support that's going to change the match for you in the same way that a lot of other teams do. I think you look at players like Big Goose on Los Angeles Gladiators, who's only a small way ahead of Houston Outlaws, or Dogman on Atlanta, or just even players in a lot higher seeds like Gangnam Jin. There's just so much output from the supports in these mid to high table teams, and Houston don't have that. But they're going up against the Boston Uprising, who are notoriously poor. They have been terrible this season. They have one of the worst map win rates per match that has ever been seen in the Overwatch League. Second worst only to the 0-40 Shanghai Dragons, which means that they're worse than the Florida Mayhem in 2018. Granted that in 2018, 2019 you had to play 4 maps. If it was 3-0 you still had a map to play, so there was more maps to play for and potentially win, which probably skews those stats, but it still shows how poor Boston have been. They have some mechanical skill on the team between Jerry and Color Hex. Punk, when he's come in, has shown to be adequate, not fantastic. And Myeonbong has looked like he's got some mechanical skill, but there's no team coordination, there's no team synergy, they don't understand how to use ultimates. They lose every single match because they can't take fights. They don't build ultimates or use them or cycle them. There is some mechanical skill on the team, but there is nothing upstairs in terms of positional awareness, ultimate usage, just any of the more sort of cerebral parts of Overwatch they cannot deal with. And they've been the worst team this season by far, and I don't see them changing that around for playoffs, which is why I have Houston Outlaws taking this pretty easily against Boston Uprising in round 1. The other match on Thursday is Washington Justice up against Vancouver Titans. Both teams have had overhauls this season. Washington have lost their star Western duo in Stratus and Corey, and taken up Suba for most of the season alongside Stitch, who's a pickup from the Vancouver Titans. Janu came in from the Vancouver Titans as well. And that's been an overhaul for them. They've had to fit the team together midway through the season. They have recently brought in Decay as well, the star DPS formerly of Los Angeles Gladiators and Dallas Fuel, who is a big upgrade for the team. I don't think Stitch has ever shown consistency at our level. He's very good for Runaway and Contenders, but didn't see much playtime in the GOATS meta for Vancouver Titans last year, and even when Rollock came in was overshadowed, I think, by Haxel. So Decay comes in, incredible hit scan player. We're thinking of him as one of the best in the league. He's got carry level performances, which not a lot of players have, where he's able to carry entire team fights and maps on his own back based on his own skill. There's not a lot of players in the league who can do that. Decay can. Whether he's given the time, support, and team synergy to be able to do that, he's obviously coming in as a very late addition for the Washington Justice, is to be seen. But they have good pieces around him. Janu was an MVP candidate last year. I personally voted for him. I think the Divas were incredible last year. And Aim God on the flex support is good as well. I think Washington have a lot of good pieces. And it's just whether they can put it together in time for this playoffs. But I think that those good pieces are enough to take it out against the Vancouver Titans, who have had a very strange season. They started off with their successful team of the 2019 Overwatch League season with players like Haxel, Janu, Haxel who won Rookie of the Year, Janu who's up for MVP candidate. They brought in Fissure on the main tank role, who replaced Bumper, who's not to be seen anywhere this year, and Tizzy as well, who is a very mechanically gifted main tank, and it looked like he sorted out a lot of his early attitude problems in the league. They brought in veterans like Ryu Jae Hong. They had Twilight, who's an MVP candidate. It was a strong team, and they had some rough times at the beginning of the season because of the coronavirus situation and the Western organization not managing the Korean team well at all. They were swapping between regions multiple times, and the team imploded, basically. They stopped playing, they stopped scrimming, and Vancouver Titans were forced to release all of their players and technically sack Fisher because of some contract issues with releasing him. But they let go of every single one of their players and picked up an entirely rookie squad from strong contenders players who were playing from all different parts of the world. You had KSA playing in Saudi Arabia. You had Tsuna playing in France. They brought in Shockwave, who was playing in Denmark. You also had Canadians like Rolf, Americans in Kaka. So you're playing from all the way from West Coast America to the Middle East on different pings, different time zones. Even for scrimmages, that's impossible for players to be on a even keel, start to build team synergy, start to really, even though they obviously can't spend time with each other being in different locations, just start to build team relationships because the time zones are so vast. And they've had some performances. Shockwave has looked really good. KSA has looked really good. They've clearly got some good pieces, some key pickups, but they've just not been given the conditions to be able to perform well. And Vancouver knew that this probably was never going to be a season for them after they released their entire squad. But I think in this matchup, Washington have the better pieces. They have been together longer in terms of some of the tanks and the sports. And whilst the DPS is new for them, it's a new partnership. Decay's there, and I think that's at another level than anyone from the Vancouver Titans. So this match I think goes towards Washington Justice, which brings us on to day 2. This is still elimination rounds, which means if you lose, you don't go into a loser's bracket, you are exited from the tournament. So this is when we also start getting into opponent picks. So the highest seeds at this round, which is Los Angeles Gladiators in the 6th seed for NA, get to choose first. And I've picked them choosing Washington Justice. We'll get onto why, but I'll talk a little bit about Los Angeles Gladiators first. This has been an up and down season for them. Their peak has looked incredible, but they've also looked very, very poor. They're one of the only teams to lose against Boston. They have struggled to fit Mirror into the lineup where he can be effective. He's been on all 3 roles, DPS, tank and support, and they've lost a lot of maps with him flexing around. However, their replacement for Mirror in Kevster has been very, very good, despite him being on European time and ping. And Birdring has looked good recently. There was a lot of questions about Birdring coming to the season. He seemed to lose motivation last year. Is he up for playing? Is it a risk that the Gladiators can take? And he's performed well. He's performed the roles that they need him to perform in, and he's got such a high peak in do or die moments that he can really make a difference for this team. And he showed that in the recent weeks where Gladiators have pushed up a couple of seeding spots. On top of that, OG and Space are both very experienced tank lines. OG coming over from Dallas Fuel in a trade with Decay. He's a solid main tank. I think he's exactly what Los Angeles needed after Raw left and ended up at Washington. And if they can get him playing the Winston, Gladiators look very, very good. I think OG's Winston is his star role. He's adequate on other heroes, but not at the same level as his Winston is. Space, whilst he can play the Diva, is exactly the same in terms of his star role is Diva, and playing anything else, he has mixed performances. But alongside that, you have the veteran backline of Big Goose and Shaz, who have been together forever, the Finnish duo. And Big Goose has come out with a little bit of criticism. He's not been at the same level last season, but he hits up big moments, and it's clear to see the coordination effect that he has on the team when he was out and Paintbrush came in, who was then traded to Dallas Fuel. He's able to coordinate so well with his team to get big environmental plays. He's able to make big moments happen for the Gladiators. So they've got decent teams. They've historically been up and down, but they're currently at an up, and I think they're starting to figure out what they want to do and how to maximize the effectiveness of their star players in Birdring, OGE, and Space. And I think Kevster really adds to the lineup. So I've got them here as choosing Washington Justice because Washington, despite coming out against the Vancouver, as I've got here, I think will still start to struggle there. Still putting together pieces from all over the place. Los Angeles would have seen them play. I think that there's so much to be said in this format about data on teams because the meta can be all over the place. We don't know how teams are going to shape up. We don't know who's going to have upset potential at all. You can't trust any team. But if you've seen them play, you've got some data about how they want to go. So I think that they want to choose either the Justice or Houston, and I think that the Justice is the weaker team out of the two, given that they will still be figuring out how to play with each other. A lot of the Gladiators, staff, coaches, and some of the players have played with the K before. They've scrimmed a lot with the K, obviously with the K being on the Gladiators roster last year. And they'll be the most effective team at being able to shut him down. I think once you take Decay out of Washington, I don't think they have any star performers. And whilst Janu is a very, very good player, he's not someone who can carry a match in the same way Decay can. And I think Gladiators will have strategies to shut him down and limit his carry potential. So I think they'll be confident with choosing the Washington Justice here and going up against them and coming out with the win. Then you have Atlanta. I've got them picking Toronto here just because I expect this is a match with two new teams. I think that whilst there is something to be said for data against Houston, Toronto don't have quality in the same way that Houston do. I think Toronto have been more solid consistently than Houston this year, but I also don't think they have the peaks. I don't think they have the upset potential that Houston might have, especially if they look good against Boston with Dante performing. I think that Atlanta won't want to take that risk. They're very, very good at playing weaker teams and making sure that they stomp the weaker teams that they're supposed to beat. They've not performed so well against the better teams. They don't really take many maps. They went to a very, very good performance against the San Francisco Shock in the final game of the regular season. But apart from that, they're very much a pub stomper type team. A lot of the players are very solid, but again don't have much carry potential. I think that Gator and Hawk is a good tank line. I think that Gator looked incredible on the Sigma in the playoffs last year. It was part of the reasons they beat Shock in the playoffs last year. And it's been a shame to see that Atlanta don't want to even try out playing Gator in the Sigma role, mainly because they've got Hawk as the off-tank. Gator and Hawk played with each other at Atlanta Academy. And you take it from there. They've had some issues with their DPS line. Baby Bay recently retired to go to Valorant, and they brought in Saucy. And Edison has performed well for them this year, had some really good performances, but also went missing a lot of the time. And whilst Erster we expected to be the kind of performer alongside Decay who can really change matches, we've not seen a lot from him this season. Atlanta haven't played him outside of the May very much, and they prefer to run Saucy recently as well on a lot of comps if they need the Genji or the Sombra. And whilst the DPS line haven't looked fantastic, there is quality there is mechanical skill, and Massa in the back as well for their supports, I think, is a strong player. And they seem to be very, very set on metas, and they know what their strengths are. Now, in the seeding games, after the Countdown Cup, they did throw out some cheesy comps, sort of wacky Bastion Symmetra things that worked, but not great. I expect them to be a lot more standard this time, stick to double shield or dive meta, which is something that they've practiced and they understand their win conditions for. Because I think that they're an okay coached team as well, which we don't think is the same case for Toronto. Toronto have mediocre pieces with mediocre management, and they've been middle of the pack the whole season. They had an upset in the Summer Showdown, going a couple of rounds in, but once they came up against any decent opponent, they fell flat. And most of that was on the back of Agility's Genji. And I think that's something with Toronto throughout the season, is they've had some peaks in certain metas when their players are on very, very niche roles. So if Logix is allowed to pop off on the Widowmaker, or Agilities is able to pop off on the Genji, they look okay. But if they don't, then they look poor. Shore4 is a very flexible DPS, but again, whilst he can cover almost every hero in the game, doesn't play them at the same level that you need to carry a team. And they don't have an identity in the tank role either. I don't think that any of the main tanks, whether it be Beast or Numlocked, can lead this team. And I don't see in the flex tank role them taking that either. It's a shame to see, but I think that's the main issue with Toronto Defiant, is they just don't have any leaders. I think Shore4 is the leader for the team, but there's only so much you can do from that flex DPS role. I think you need someone in the tanks and the supports to take charge and be active. And whilst they have some skill in those areas, in terms of Kariv is a very, very mechanically gifted player, he's not a vocal player. And I think that's going to be Toronto's detriment. It has been throughout the season. They lack leadership, they lack direction. And I think Atlanta are going to be very, very comfortable coming up against a team like Toronto. So they're going to do that. Not only because they can win, but it also forces the next matchup between Dallas and Houston, and you're knocking one of those out going into the next round. So it sets up the battle for Texas in round 2. Dallas against Houston. So we already talked about Houston. Dallas are a team which have very good pieces. And they had great pieces when Decay was in as well. I think that their coaching let them down in terms of there wasn't any consistency from them. Gamsu and Note have a lot of experience together, playing in Boston in Season 1, in the Golden Stage 3 for them. And they're both very, very good tanks. I think Gamsu is a leader. I think he looked very good with Shanghai last year. He's not someone who's going to change matches for you in the same way as Smurf or a Gushui will, but he's solid. And Note is very similar as well, and they work well together and they synergize well. But they do need people behind them to work for them. They are very good at creating opportunities for other people to pop off. I think if you look at them in Stage 3 of Boston, with Boston in the 2018 Overwatch League, they created the space for Striker to look like the best player in the league in that stage. And they did it again for Decay early on in the season, and I think that's part of the reason why Decay thought he was carrying so much. Was because there were some poor performances from Gansu and Note, but also they're not impact players. They allow other players to make the impact and they create the space for them. So it depends on the meta a lot for this match, because Doha has got some very niche picks which he looks good on and solid on the others. Onigod has come in for Decay to play the hit scan roles and has looked good. Obviously not at the same level, and I don't think anyone was expecting him to be, especially coming in as a rookie to the season on online play. So Onigod isn't really going to make the same difference that Decay will. The main issue I have with the Dallas is in their supports. They picked up Paintbrush in the season midway through, who has never impressed me. He didn't look good on the Gladiators at the beginning of the season and has not looked good on Dallas since. He doesn't seem like much of a vocal leader. He's got a personality, but in terms of from what I've seen from Dallas in the servers, it can go either way with him. And also closer as well is very similar. I think if you have Gamsu and Note, you need someone in the supports who is aggressive and can hit shots the same way a Gangnam Jin, a Jonak, a Twilight, a Violet, like Alarm. If you have a player like that in those positions, I think Dallas look a lot better, and they look a lot more together, but they don't have a piece like that, and I think that is really to their detriment, because it means that Gamsu and Note aren't being maximized, not being optimized, and also means that you're relying so much more on your DPS, where now Dallas don't have that. They've also removed their coaches as well at the same time as the Decay departure, and they are going to be hit and miss. They're going to be playing off their own instincts. They're not going to be incredibly well coached coming into the playoffs, which is why I have Houston taking this. I think that they'll have some momentum from the earlier match against Boston, started to work out some of their mistakes that might have come up, and be more comfortable in the second match and take it out against Dallas. So that pushes us through to round 3. This is where losers brackets start to come in. So if you lose in round 3, you drop down into the losers bracket, and you can make a losers run as well. So Philadelphia are the first team to pick. I've got them picking Houston Outlaws, the lowest seed left in the tournament, and they've got a ton of data on them. They've already played 2 matches. They know how Houston want to play, what mistakes Houston make, and it's probably going to be the simplest pick for them. Philadelphia have had a very successful season. They have very, very good pieces in a lot of places. You look at Carpe, who was early on a very, very strong nomination for the MVP. He's in the MVP conversation. You have Fury and Poco, who are both very, very good off-tanks. We thought that Fury is going to take the main off-tank role, but Poco has shown on certain maps he is the off-tank of choice, and it allows Philadelphia Fusion to tailor strategies to specific maps depending on which off-tank they have in between Poco and Fury. Fury is a mechanical god. Like, his micro mechanics are at another level. It's really the future of sort of diva play or off-tank play. Is just he is able to maximize so many of his mechanics that he's just ridiculously good. You've got Sato, who's looked good this season as well. I was skeptical of him in the first 2 seasons for Philadelphia, especially in 2019 in the GOATS meta. But he came in on the Reinhardt rush comps early on in the season and was slamming everyone. His Winston is his preferred role, and he looks very, very good. And he looks like he's leading the team now, which is something that I didn't see earlier on for Philadelphia. So the tank line is very, very strong, definitely one of the strongest in North America. They have Carpe, they have Alarm, who's an MVP candidate in his first year. We knew he was going to be good. He's been grinding in contenders with Fusion University on the most successful contenders team of all time, one of the most successful esports teams of all time. And we knew he was going to pop off this year, and he's popped off, and he's an MVP candidate. Alongside him, Funny Astro has come in and looked incredible on the Lucio and very solid on other main tanks that you need to come in. His Brig has turned out to be solid, despite the Philadelphia Fusion not wanting to play him there. The main question with Philadelphia comes is, you're limited in terms of comps because of the DPS roles that you have. Who is playing that secondary DPS role? Is it Hisu? Is it Ivy? Is it EQO? It's not Chipsa. What are their star roles? I think Ivy has got an incredible Mei, and he's got a very good Genji. I think that Hisu has a fantastic Sombra, and EQO can play the Echo. He looked very confident on the Echo. I think Ivy is the better Genji out of the two of them as well. But outside of those heroes, who do you pick? If we're in... I know that Hisu can play a lot of hit scan, but if you need Carpe to go hit scan and then you need another Tracer player, you don't have it. There's not a lot of options for the DPS to look incredibly comfortable, and I think that's Philadelphia's biggest issue. But they came out number 1 seed this season. They've been consistently good. They've managed to work around their limitations. Hisu's popped off on the Sombra really hard, and I think that's been the main part of Philadelphia really stepping it up in the qualifying matches for the tournaments, looking good in tournaments after their loss in the May Melee. I think after the May Melee they really took a step up and looked comfortable. So they're a very good team. They're going up against the Houston Outlaws, and they outrank the Houston Outlaws in every single area. They'll have so much more data. They'll see how the meta's started to develop by this point after 2 days worth of matches. It's a tough matchup for Houston Outlaws. It's a really tough matchup for Houston Outlaws. So I see Philadelphia going through. Then second seed choose. So the San Francisco Shock can choose between Los Angeles Gladiators, Atlanta Reign, or Los Angeles Valiant. The Valiant are the only team not to have played so far, so I think they're a team to be avoided because they can pop off on their own metas. They've shown to be very innovative in whatever comps they want to run, and they're an unknown entity, basically. You don't know what they're going to throw at you, and if they throw at you something that you're not expecting, that they are particularly comfortable on, they look really, really, really strong. So I think Valiant isn't a team that anyone wants to pick. And San Francisco Shock recently had a very, very tough match against Atlanta Reign. Went to 5 maps in the last regular season game of the season. Now, the season was pretty much over for San Francisco at that point. They couldn't take the number 1 seed. So it's different circumstances, but even then, I don't think that they'll want to come up against Atlanta Reign after the history between the two teams. Atlanta Reign knocked them out of the 2019 playoff winners bracket, forced them down into elimination rounds, and that's when San Francisco really popped off. So that leaves them up against Gladiators, and I think that they would have seen enough data from the Gladiators to know what they want to do. Now, San Francisco Shock have looked incredible again this year. I think Ans on the sniper has looked incredible on the hit scan. He's clearly one of the best hit scan in the league. Record amount of final blows, and just so consistent with his damage output. It's ridiculous. Alongside that, you've had Striker popping off on Tracer for most of the season and looks incredible. Rascal was an early MVP nomination in the conversation because he's flexible. He can pick up a lot of roles very quickly and play them well, especially the Mei. He's looked good on the Genji, and they've got Tayo who can come in, and if they want to run like double dive, DPS can come in, and he's shown to perform well in the match that he's played. Their tank line, Smurf, has been incredible this season. I think up there with Fearless as the best Winstons in the league. And Choi Hyobin is my MVP. Choi Hyobin has been my MVP for the last 2 seasons. I was so surprised when he didn't get nominated for MVP conversation in 2019. He got finals MVP in 2019 and has just kept on being consistently incredible. Consistently incredible. So I really expect San Francisco to do well. That's not even talking about their support line of Moth, who's an incredible in-game leader, incredibly mechanically gifted on the main support, and then the flex support gods of Twilight, who came over from Vancouver Titans and has fitted in really well with the squad, and Violet. If the meta tends towards double flex support like it has midway through the season with maybe a BAP Zen, or you want to run an Anabap, for instance, for healing output, you've got that with Twilight and Violet. Better than anyone else in the league. So they look like a really strong team. They're obviously coached by Krusty, who's the best coach in the league, I think, in Overwatch League history. You can easily say, given what he's done with the San Francisco Shock since he's been there. And they're a very smart team who can adapt and force out mistakes from a lot of teams. They play at a tempo that not a lot of other teams do, and just make decisions so much faster than other teams and so much more coordinated than other teams at that pace, that it can be hard for teams to catch up and limit their own mistakes or punish anything from the San Francisco Shock. And I think that's part of the reason why they're going to beat the Los Angeles Gladiators. I think that they're going to be able to shut down Birdring. I think Birdring is going to be a key player for Los Angeles Gladiators. And I think they're going to be able to shut him down more than Space is able to shut down Ansan. And I think Ansan is just going to have such an advantage in the hit scan battle, no matter what meta, especially if it tends towards a Widowmaker meta. No matter what the meta is, the tank line is able to create so much more space for Ansan and put so much more pressure on Birdring that I find it very difficult for the Gladiators to really make much of a show against the San Francisco Shock. So that's why I've went this way. San Francisco, I think, take this pretty easily. Next up is the third seed, Paris. They're either picked up against Atlanta or Valiant, and I've already talked about why teams don't want to pick Valiant. So I think that they'll come up against Atlanta. Atlanta have struggled against the top teams as well. I don't think that they've beaten Paris this year. So I think it's a natural pick for Paris to take. Paris have had a strange season in the terms of they signed Sparkle at the beginning of the season, who didn't turn 18 until March or May. They played a lot of the season without a star DPS player in Sparkle, but XC filled that role incredibly well. Another pickup from Element Mystic alongside the coach. XC is an MVP candidate. His hit scan play has been incredible. He's had so much more flexibility in that role than a lot of other players as well. I look back to the Summer Showdown final against Philadelphia Fusion, and just his pick to McCree, where we'd not seen McCree at all in the tournament up until that point, in the grand finals of that tournament, and completely shutting down Philadelphia in key moments on that hero, forcing them to adapt and looking incredibly comfortable there. XE has been a really, really key standout performer for Paris Eternal. On top of that, they've got so many DPS looks that they can run. Soon and Nico looked very good at the start of the season when they needed to run May comps. Nico looked very, very good on the May. And Soon on Hitscan or Sombra can really pick it up, and he's at this level. He maybe doesn't have the same peak as Sparkle does, but he's a consistent, solid performer, and the amount of DPS looks that they can create between those 4 DPS, Soon and Sparkle, XZ and Sparkle, Nico and Soon, we've seen Nico and XZ as well. It's so versatile and so well coordinated in every instance of it that Paris are a real contender through this whole season. They've looked strong and they're able to catch teams off guard just by virtue of their insane comfort and flexibility on the DPS roles. Alongside XE and Sparkle, Paris also signed Hanbin, who's been in very, very good off-tank for Paris Eternal. There are a lot of fantastic off-tanks in NA, and Hanbin is up there with Fury, Meko. Probably not the same level of Choi Hyobin, but Choi Hyobin's on another world. And Hanbin has been very, very good. FD God has been a sensation, especially when he's able to play Lucio. And Fielder has come in partway through the season, playing from Korea on really high ping, and looked incredibly solid. He's been a very, very good performer, some of the highest stats on Ana in the league, and he looks to have fit in so well with the rest of this squad. And it's a real testament to the coaching as well from Paris. So there's incredible performers in every stage. You can make arguments about the main tank role. Ben Best is probably not flexible enough to put out an incredible performance, but he went from a pickup that in the 2019 season with Paris where you're like, should he be in the league, to looking like a very, very comfortable main tank in the league. You bring in No Smite on the Winston, who's another player where you're like, should he be here? But he's shown that he can hang. So Paris are a very, very good team, very well coached, have so many looks, and I think that's going to catch Atlanta off guard. Atlanta seem to look best when they are in a comfortable meta for themselves, where they're able to play comfort picks. And Paris are just going to play around that so well that I really don't see Atlanta being able to put up much of a fight against Paris here. They've struggled against better teams, and Paris are a better team. They just are. Which brings us on to the 4th seed, Florida Mayhem, up against Los Angeles Valiant. This was the toughest pick out of the NA bracket for me. There's a history between the two teams, which is this season has been incredibly competitive. Both teams really love to play double shield Ashe Tracer. Both teams looked best in that meta, where Yaki could pop off on the Tracer, Shax for Valiant could pop off on the Tracer. You had Gargoyle and McGravy as two top performers on the off-tank roles as well. Again, not on the same level as Choi Hyobin, but probably the next level there. I would put both Gargoyle and Choi Hyobin. You've had Gangnam Jin for Florida Mayhem popping off, and BQB for Florida as well, and I think that's why they take it. Florida have a very, very solid, consistent starting 6 that is very, very used to playing with each other now. Exceeded expectations. I actually had high hopes for them at the beginning of the season, based on their performances at the end of last season, particularly by Gargoyle and Fate. I thought that they fit together really well, and once they decided fully that those two were the tanks that they were playing with Karayan taking a back role, then they looked really, really good, and the pickups that they made from contenders in Yaki and Gangnam Jin have been incredible. Really, really incredible. Gangnam Jin has been ridiculous. I think he is the best Baptiste in the league. Mechanically, I would put him as the best Bap in the league. He's got a very good Zenyatta as well, probably not as good as Twilight, for instance, but in terms of Baptiste for Baptiste, I think Gangnam Jin is incredible. He's really, really fantastic. So they're up against the Los Angeles Valiant, who's another team that we didn't have high hopes for at the beginning of the season. They let go their whole squad at the end of 2019 Overwatch League and rebuilt it from trials with a bunch of rookies. And they've looked good. They are able to put together innovative compositions, whether that was the Torb Ashe at the beginning of the season, or the Tracer Ashe, and really pushed that meta as far as it could go. McGravy on the F-Tank role has had pop-off moments. You've had Dreamer, who's been solid. Shax has been a revelation on the Tracer, and when they can't play him there, KSP and KSF have a very, very good synergy in the DPS role, where they're mechanically gifted but they work off each other, and their hero pools really match each other's to cover so many different metas. That the Valiant have really been pushing above their weight in terms of the quality of their players as well, I think. I don't think their supports are incredible quality. Lastro's looked good, but not at the same level as Gangnam Jin or other flex supports in NA. Rain has been decent, and Gago Dreamer on the main tank is decent, but they're 5th in NA, they're 5th seeding for a reason, and a lot of that comes down to Packing 10 on the coaching role and putting together this team and them really exceeding expectations. And they're such a wild horse, a wild card and dark horse in terms of you don't know what to expect from them. And they are very accomplished at what they want to do, and they have very clear ideas of what they want to do. They pushed Florida to map 5s multiple times this season, pulled out reverse sweep against them in the seeding games, and have performed against Florida Mayhem very, very well this season. Despite that, I think Florida just have enough quality that they'll be able to pick out what they need to do in this meta to overtake the Valiant. And this is the tightest match, I think, in NA out of my whole bracket. But Florida, they just have slightly more quality across the team, and I think especially in the supports, than I see from Los Angeles Valiant. But that means that Houston, Valiant, Gladiators and Reign drop down to the losers brackets. So we've talked about all of these teams so far. It'll be Houston up against Valiant, if my predictions are correct, and Gladiators against Atlanta Reign. Valiant have performed so much better than Houston this year. Houston will have been found out against Philadelphia. Valiant are coached so well that I think this is not even close. I think this is an easy blowout for Valiant. They just have too much quality for Houston to deal with. And in the next round, this is another tough match. Gladiators against Atlanta Reign. So Gladiators again have very high peaks, very low troughs, but I think that they also have a more solid, consistent output than Atlanta Reign in terms of Birdring is able to pop off more than Atlanta's DPS, I think, and we've seen Birdring pop off in do or die moments in playoffs for London in 2018, the grand finals. I think they're able to really push through in quality. Space and OG have an advantage in the tank lineups as well, and I think that they'll just see how Atlanta's composition was broken down in the match that Atlanta loses and be able to pick up on that and push forward into a victory. So coming into winners semis, that means that you get Fusion up against Florida, and we've seen Florida pull out upsets against Philadelphia Fusion, most notably in the May Melee semi-finals to get through to the finals against San Francisco Shock. But I don't see that happening again. I think that the match against Valiant would have taken a lot out of them, will have hit their confidence a little bit in terms of it'll be a really tight match, and Philadelphia coming in with all of the confidence, all of the momentum, they'll get a ton of data against from that match against the Valiant that will stand them in good stead, because they'll be able to learn so much more from the Mayhem Valiant match than the Mayhem will be able to learn from Fusion rolling Houston. And that just puts Philadelphia Fusion at such an advantage in terms of the information, where the meta stands, how they adapt to it. Florida have shown that they're not the most adaptable team, so I see Florida just putting too much. I see Philadelphia putting too much pressure on Florida and coming out with the win. Shock against Eternal, another incredibly tight match. This very much depends on the meta. If Sparkle is able to pop off, then you can possibly see them taking out the match against the Shock like they did in the Summer Showdown semi-finals. But I don't think you can really guarantee on any metas. And the Shock just have so much adaptability and flexibility that if they see Paris popping off in a tough match against the Reign, on certain heroes, certain compositions, San Francisco Shock will be able to work around that. I think that in the Summer Showdown, which is the only mid-season tournament that they didn't win, they had awkward read of the meta going into that. They didn't expect the Genji to be prominent, which was the most key DPS compositions, was having that Genji in, and they didn't expect it, and they were caught off guard. And I don't think that they will be caught off guard this time. I think that their scrimming will be so much more on point, their coaching will be so much more on point, their reviews will be so much more on point, that now it's so the stakes are so high for them that I don't see the same upset happening again. And the Shock just they will be able to see the mistakes that Paris are going to be making and force them to make those mistakes time and time again and punish them for them. That's a play style of the Shock that's really, really important. They play at such a high tempo that I don't think Paris will be able to adapt in the same way that Shock will. So I think they'll come out with the victory, which will mean in the next round of the losers bracket, Paris go up against Valiant, who've just beaten Outlaws, and Mayhem are going up against the Gladiators, who've just beaten Atlanta. Paris Valiant, I think Valiant won't be able to take a ton of information out of their matches in terms of, yes, they will have had a tight match against Florida and started to figure out some of their own mistakes from there and started to work on them, but their second match gives them nothing against Houston, I don't think. I think it's an easy match for them. They outclass them in so many senses that they're not able to take much from it in terms of, okay, this is working for us, this is what we need to change, these are the mistakes we're making. So they won't be able to prep for Paris Eternal, who now will have had a few matches at playing what they want to play, seeing what's working, tight matches against Atlanta, who are a good opponent, San Francisco Shock, who are an incredible opponent, and really coalescing a style that works for them within the metas that are emerging. I don't think Valiant will have had the same time to be able to do this. So Paris, with superior quality on their team, adaptability in the DPS roles, if they need to move on to Soon and Nico, they can do. If they need to pop off with Sparkle and XC, like, go for gold. Like, that's just incredible for them. And that just offers them so much more adaptability than Valiant has. So I see that match going towards Paris Eternal. Florida against Gladiators. I think this is when Gladiators do trip up. I think Gargoyle's playstyle is incredible because it really shuts down key players of the other team. It really limits the effect of key players of the other team, particularly enemy DPS. I think Gargoyle do such a good job at shutting down Birdring and enabling his team to shut down Birdring. It'll be a similar example as Los Angeles against San Francisco Shock. They'll have seen how the Shock managed to shut down players and they'll adapt that into their own style and they'll be comfortable at doing so. And once the Gladiators lose one map or two against Florida Mayhem, I don't see them having the mental capabilities to come back when it seems like all is lost. I think Gargoyle's playstyle is really key in the outcome for this match, which is why I've chosen Florida Mayhem. Which means that Paris and Florida play each other in the next round of the losers bracket. Again, I have Florida coming out with this because of Gargoyle. I can't underestimate how impressed I've been with Gargoyle since he's come into the league, and his ridiculous output on Sigma in particular, I think will be enough to shut down what Paris Eternal want to do. I think after the match against Valiant, they'll have some key ideas about where they fit in best in terms of the metas that are emerging, and then really want to push that in the next round. I think Gargoyle is such a clever player that he'll understand the win conditions of Paris Eternal and start to break that down. This is another really, really tight match. I don't know whether I'm putting too much stock in Florida because I expected them to be okay at the beginning of the season. They reached those expectations in May Melee and have not had middling performances since. but I do think that the potential is there for this. This would be an upset. Florida over Paris. But I think this is where it's most likely to happen. These kind of upsets is this kind of match where you've got a player like Gargoyle who just fits so well against what Paris want to throw at Florida. And Florida, I think, will be more confident in what their own strengths are. I think Paris will still be flitting between a few things. I think that's where their flexibility might hurt them a bit, is they saw good looks when XC and Sparkle were playing, and good looks when Soon and Nico were playing on certain maps, and try to fit that in. And they'll be working on 2 or 3 different compositions at a time, whereas Florida will be more stable in what they want to run. That's why I see this match going that way. And then winners finals would be Philadelphia against San Francisco. Who the heck knows with this one? They've met up 3 times in this season. First regular season match, Shock rolled Fusion. They met in the Countdown Cup final, where it was a final, so Fusion kind of choked a bit. They didn't look like they could have played, and even then it was a semi-close match. It wasn't a roll either way. The matchup is really good between the two. Choi Hoban is incredible, but Poco and Fury, the flexibility that they have between the two, what they're able to do is fantastic. Carpe up against Ants is ridiculous. Smith against Sato. Alarm against Violet or Twilight. Funny Astro as a main support against Moth. They're probably, like, you're looking at the top 2 in NA on all of those roles. So it's a really tight match. And in the last seeding game, which set up first seed for Philadelphia, it was a 3-0 victory. And on top of that, there was a lot of spicy heat on Twitter between the 2 teams after that came out. Philadelphia coming out top seed after rolling. The Shock said some things. Shock were like, oh, do it in a final against us and then we'll talk about it. But I think that Shock at this point, whilst they're in the winners bracket, don't have the same do or die fight back mentality that they do thrive in. And I think that the metas still won't be developed enough for Shock to pick out Fusion's playstyle and force that tempo onto Fusion. I think Fusion will be able to skirt around that tempo, rotate around it pretty comfortably. And whilst I expect this to be a really close match, I do see Philadelphia taking it for those reasons. Which sets up losers finals between Florida and San Francisco Shock. Shock have too much to play for. This would be a huge upset if Florida took it. And Shock don't allow those upsets. They're the dream killers in every single scenario. So, yeah. San Francisco Shock, I think, take this over Florida Mayhem. Their quality is so much better. Their adaptability is so much better. They'll figure out Florida's comp very early on, and they've got so much more experience in these clutch matches. They've got so much experience in these clutch matches and clutch moments that they're going to show up when they need to show up, and it'll be a match for San Francisco, which means the top 2 seeds, Philadelphia and San Francisco, go through to the grand finals. They'll have to quarantine 2 weeks in an Asian country to be confirmed, and then have a week off before the grand finals qualifiers start. Then we move on to the Asian bracket. So for Asia, on the first day we have Chengdu Hunters against London Spitfire, 2 lowest seeds in the Asia Pacific region. Chengdu Hunters, let's go Hunt, have had a middling season. They've had some very, very good performances in the build-up to the Countdown Cup. They've had some awful performances when they were needing to run the double shield. They changed coaches, brought in Chen, who was a former commentator from the Chinese broadcasts. and they look better when they're on comfort picks. Once they're able to move Among's ball, move away from the Orisa, they were great. Where I think they've looked best is in a sort of mid-range pokey dive composition, where they're running the Winston Zarya or the Wrecking Ball Zarya, and they're running Leave on the Ashe. Leave has been a revelation on the Ashe for the Chengdu Hunters this year. He's really pushed them to another level on the hit scan roll. And I see Ashe actually clutching out so many key moments for Chengdu that I actually have them going quite far, and you'll see part of it. But Leave, if he's given the space to be able to do it, if Chengdu play this sort of mid-range poke dive, have looked really, really good. The main tank is a bit of an issue. Obviously, Among is a ball guard. We'd love to see him pop off. But if ball isn't able to be in the meta, which is possible if teams decide to counter it with Orisa, there might be a problem, because we've seen issues on the Winston. I actually do a very detailed breakdown of the Winston gameplay in the Countdown Cup between Elsa against the London Spitfire and Aiting when he comes in against the Hangzhou Spark. And if Aiting plays, Chengdu are out. It's as simple as that. He came in from Hong Kong Esports for the 2020 season, following coaches. I think Molly had also played for this team, who was Edition, who's looked very, very good on the flex support role. But if Aiting plays, it's over. He's fed so much this year. He's fed so much. It's been ridiculous. I've not been impressed with him at all. He seems to lack simple engagement tools, simple spatial awareness. Again, it's all in my breakdown of the two Winston plays, which will be in the description below or at the card at the end of the video. But they're up against the London Spitfire, who are a team coming into the season full of rookies, no expectations. We expected Glister to be popping off for them, which he's not really done. He's been a good DPS, but not having fantastic performances. The other DPS role has been switched between Babel, who's looked good on specific roles like the Widowmaker, although who's looked okay on specific roles such as the Genji, and Shui, who's looked okay at specific roles like the Mei. Outside of those specific roles, all of them look poor. JMac is down there with Fusions as some of the worst, one of the worst first choice main tanks in the league. I've really not been impressed with him. London have looked lost for large points of the season, which I think mainly comes down to leadership issues and particularly coordination with JMac. Their best player has probably been Benar in the off-tank role, but there's only so much you can do from there with the pieces around him. They've been poor. They've never looked like they're going to challenge top teams, but they've also not looked like they're going to be rolled until later on in the season. They've lost a lot of confidence. They don't have any momentum moving into this. They played 3 matches against Seoul in the seeding qualifiers, and yeah, I think this goes Chengdu for this match. They beat them 3-0 in the Countdown Cup first round as well, with Elsa on the Winston, where he'd never played it before. So I see Chengdu taking this match no matter the meta. I think that Ball is okay, will be okay for the meta in APAC. Obviously, Hog is strong at the minute, and he's a sort of counter. He's able to hook Ball back in, and you're able to burn him down super quickly. And there's not a lot you can do against a Hog, but again, the Hog can't take space. He's got no mobility. So if you do create knockback and create space for the team to move into, it's pretty much free, because there's no mobility from a Hog Zarya composition. On top of that, with nerfs to Brig and Orisa, very common counters to Wrecking Ball in terms of you can't Brig stun, and Orisa halt is probably one of the worst mechanics in the game for a Wrecking Ball. with both of them being nerfed and seemingly out of the meta. Brig can still make an appearance, but is a lot more squishy now. Unable to take space by herself like she was able to do in the past, which means all 3 tanks that you're running basically don't take space with any sort of mobility. They're all very static if you're running a Hog Zarya, which is the only tank line that really punishes a Wrecking Ball currently, because Orisa is weak. You might be able to see Roadhog Sigma to get the double stun in the hook and the accretion. That might be able to shut down Wrecking Ball, but we don't know coming into this meta how the tanks are looking, and I think in that sort of chaos, Wrecking Ball looks good. So I see Chengdu really being able to put a ton of pressure onto London Spitfire, which means that they come into the round 2 of Asia Pacific, where they're coming up. I've got here that New York chooses Chengdu Hunters. The reason that I think New York choose Chengdu Hunters is that Chengdu are a lower seed than Seoul Dynasty. You've seen them play the previous day as well against the London Spitfire, so you have ideas of what they might run on certain maps or certain styles of play. And I think if you're New York, you're more comfortable against someone that you've seen than someone you haven't, especially when it's a lower seed such as Chengdu. New York haven't impressed me so much this season. They've been a top 3 team in Season 1 and Season 2, the 2018-2019 season of Overwatch League. They haven't been top 3 this year. And they've actually, I think, taken steps back. I think that in trying to incorporate a new style of play, a more aggressive style of play with Hopper, Haxal, they've lost a lot of identity, and some of their key pieces that worked in that style, such as Jonak or Mano, aren't able to have the same impact in the style of play that they're going for. I think they've looked lost in terms of their DPS lineup. They ran Who Are You at the beginning of the year, who didn't look fantastic, didn't seem to have the performances that we had expected of such a big name coming into the league. They signed Haxal after the Vancouver Titans implosion, and again hasn't really made a name. He's a very aggressive player, needs a lot of resources, which doesn't fit how Mano and Jonak really work. They've wanted to push towards that with Hopper on the off tank, but they've decided to play Bianca recently, who I don't really see as much of an upgrade. He's played solidly. He's probably more of what New York needs than Hopper, but still hasn't put in the sort of performances that's really going to take New York to another level, back to where they were in the first 2 seasons. Libero is a solid performer, but is never going to have clutch pop-off moments for you, and I think that that's what New York are looking for at the minute. And Sabiel Obi is very good on niche picks, like he always has been. Support-wise, Jonak's not at the same level he's been, probably because he's not got the same level of support from Animo. They're running lots of different comps. They had a good performance against Shanghai, where they threw out lots of different comps in the Countdown Cup, but didn't adapt to any of them as well. And I think going up against Chengdu is really bad for them. They seem to perform badly when getting dragged into the Hunter style, which they seem to choose to do this season. They chose to do it in the build-up to the Countdown Cup, where they got reverse swept. And then followed it up with a similar performance against Guangzhou, which they actually won, where they sort of went into this Wrecking Ball style. If the Chengdu Hunters catch them off guard at the beginning, and New York try to adapt rather than assert their own ideas of meta compositions, it's downhill for them. I think that's when they look really poor, is when they move off their practiced compositions and practiced adaptations. So that's why I see this match going towards the Hunters. In the next match, you'll have 4 against 5, Hangzhou Spark against Seoul Dynasty. This was a match we saw in the first round of the Countdown Cup, in which it was very typical of both seasons and playstyles for both teams, I think. So in the season of Overwatch League in 2020, Seoul has been up and down all over the place. At times they've looked like world beaters and go up against the Shanghais and San Francisco Shocks, and at other times they've been losing against everyone that came up against. I think that a lot of this is down to a lack of leadership. I don't see Gesture, Prophet, Marvel or Michelle or anyone in the front line really taking charge of how they want to play, really being vocal and making decisions, which means that Seoul Dynasty fall behind once the meta starts to be developed, I think, when there are better communicators on other teams. And this is what we saw in the match between Seoul Dynasty and Hangzhou Spark, is for the first two maps, Hangzhou Spark were playing Double Shield, which is a composition that they'd clearly thought was the meta and what they'd practiced on, and they got rolled. Seoul Dynasty came out all guns blazing with their own Double Shield, their own dive, their own Winston Zarya, that really pushed Spark back. Spark didn't look like they had any options to go against Seoul and went down 2-0. Half time, they seemed to revert back to their sort of instinctual comfort picks with Gushui on the Winston, and they pulled back with a dive comp from there to not only beat Seoul but also beat Chengdu in the next round and get through to the finals against Shanghai. So, and then once they started losing against Shanghai, they went back to the 2-2, the Double Shield, which they looked incredibly poor in as well. This points to me that they have coaching issues, which is something that was apparent in the 2019 season as well, where they picked up metas very, very slowly. But they have a high ceiling in terms of their individual mechanical skill. So I think that Hangzhou reverting back to their instinctual picks was beneficial for them, and it also helped that Seoul did what they've done through the season and completely threw. They came out with an anti-dive comp against the new dive comp of Hangzhou Spark, which was a McCree Reaper that theoretically works but in practice just does nothing, and got rolled, like absolutely rolled. It was a terrible composition. So that's pretty consistent for both their seasons. Hangzhou looking poor, slow to adapt to metas or things, but having a high mechanical skill ceiling once they start to understand what they're doing, which is why I really want them to look towards what they are best at rather than what is meta. But they've shown consistently that they don't do this. So that's actually why I have Seoul taking it, which despite their season as just having some of the worst decisions I've ever seen, but also having some very, very good gameplay, where they look very good in compositions that they're practiced in, which was at the beginning of the season, the Double Shield, and then they started to work on their Winston Zarya dive, which was poor as they started, but then looked better, very accomplished recently. That I think that as long as they don't throw out any new compositions against Hangzhou, they take this, and I think that they've learned from their mistakes to actually take this. Unfortunately, the losers from this round don't go into a losers bracket, so that's goodbye for London, NYXL and Spark in my bracket. But going into the actual elimination rounds, so if you lose this, you go into the losers bracket and can make a losers run from there. Shanghai get first pick. I think they picked Chengdu. They've seen 2 matches from Chengdu. They are so good at exploiting everything. Shanghai have such a unique style that we've not really seen in the Overwatch League before. It's almost like a mixture between 2018 New York Excelsior and 2019 Spark, where the sort of cerebral capabilities of each player on the team to force out mistakes that you then react to and punish, much like the NYXL in 2018, But also they have the ability to change the tempo and adapt really quickly and take it up a step and force mistakes out of other teams, which is a typical Shock style. They're able to manage both styles so well, whereas I think currently, whilst NYXL are trying to do that, they're stuck in a grey area in between, and not mastered either, whilst Shanghai have mastered both. And I think that style works super well against the Chengdu hunters, who are going to be full of mistakes and basically try to like out crazy you. But Shanghai Dragons have been unflappable this season. There was an early win in the season for Chengdu against Shanghai, one of Shanghai's only losses in the regular season. But I don't think Chengdu can replicate it. I think Shanghai have stepped up a gear since then, and I don't think that they're actually... I think they're untouchable in Asia. I don't think anyone's going to get even close to winning against Shanghai. So why I got this match going the way it does. Lip has been the best Sombra. Fled has been MVP candidate, incredible flex DPS, able to play everything at a superb level. And he seems to have really taken on a leadership role in the same way that like Prophet maybe for Seoul hasn't. Is they said to Fleder, you're the veteran on this team. You need to show us how to play. You need to be the leader on the server. You've got the most experience. You've got an incredible mechanical ability. You've got an incredible hero pool. Whereas for Seoul, in previous seasons, that was very much Ryo Jae-hong's role, is sort of the central leadership role for the Seoul Dynasty. And Fled has really excelled in this and really pushed to another level for the Shanghai Dragons. So many deadlifts this season. Fearless on the Winston has been a revelation. He's been so incredible. Such a redemption story for him coming back into the league after being part of the 0-40 Dragons. Void has been probably the closest thing to Choi Hyobin we've seen in the last 2 seasons. He's probably not up at that level, but he's the closest to get there. Clearly the best in Asia, MVP candidate, and Lee Jae-gon as well as a main support is really incredible. Izayaki is mechanically gifted, very strong Zenyatta, but they've got the option to play Luffy as well. He's probably a more consistent Ana. So they've got a lot of looks. If you need to go into niche metas which might develop, then you have Ding, who's able to play Pharah at an incredible level, and DM, who can come out if you need to play like a double sniper composition with Fleta. And they are incredible in their own respective roles, even though they are more niche. So there's just so much adaptability from Shanghai. They're able to play so many different styles that I just don't think anyone touches them in Asia, and I think they take an easy matchup against Chengdu. Which leaves us on to Guangzhou Charge against Seoul Dynasty. Guangzhou, despite taking the Summer Showdown against Shanghai, have shown glimpses of very good performances, but also being just a consistently solid team throughout most of the season. Despite losing players to visa issues like Neptuno and Nero, they stuck to their Korean roster. And Happy and Eileen have looked very good. Both of them also have comfort picks, which might come into any more niche metas that develop, such as Doomfist. Eileen is very good. Their tank line is solid, with Krong being a standout performer, MVP candidate and Rookie of the Year candidate as well. And the Sports and Shu and Chara are consistently good. I think that solid is the right way to determine Guangzhou Charge. But we've also seen their ability to catch teams off guard and really force them to adapt very quickly, which is why I actually think they take this matchup against Seoul. I genuinely think that Guangzhou can come out with something crazy. We've seen Nero tweeting about it, and it's going to catch Seoul off guard at the beginning. It's going to stun Seoul, they're going to go 1 or 2 maps down, and then the Seoul mentality comes in. I don't think Seoul have ever come back from a winning position once they lose momentum, it's shattered. Like, they are mentally boomed. It just doesn't work for them. And I think that's why I have the matchup going this way. Charge are going to be able to catch them off guard, stun them, and completely reset any momentum from Seoul Dynasty and come out with the win. Which means that Seoul are going to meet Chengdu Hunters in the lower bracket. And the reason I have the matchup going this way is precisely why I have Seoul losing against Guangzhou. They're not going to be able to turn around their looks. Chengdu are going to come out, stun Seoul Dynasty, and they're not going to be able to recover. Chengdu don't lose anything by losing against Shanghai. They're not expected to. I don't think they instantly lose to Shanghai and think, oh, we need to rethink our whole idea of how to play. Whereas I think Seoul will do that against Guangzhou, and Chengdu will just outplay them in the first map because they're more comfortable on what they're playing, and they'll catch Seoul off guard. And from there it'll snowball into a win for Chengdu. We've seen Chengdu be able to build momentum very, very fast, and Seoul to completely get shattered on the negative side of that momentum very, very quickly as well. And I think that just plays into Chengdu's hands to take that match against Seoul Dynasty. Which means Shanghai Dragons are up against Guangzhou Charge in the upper bracket final. And as I've said, no one's touching Shanghai. If Guangzhou do come out with the crazy strats and compositions and things, we've seen Shanghai adapt to New York in the Countdown Cup so quickly, have such a clear understanding of win conditions, not only of themselves but the other teams, and ways to mitigate other teams' win conditions and support their own, that I don't see any chance that Shanghai don't make it through to the grand finals on the winners' side. I don't think any team in Asia has the consistency to perform against Shanghai for a whole series. I really don't. Not with the ability and adaptability that Shanghai have. Which means Guangzhou go into the losers bracket up against Chengdu. And this is probably the spiciest take of my whole bracket. Whilst I've had tough decisions such as Valiant, Mayhem in NA, this is my biggest upset, I think, out of the whole bracket that I've got. Hunters against Charge. And again, I'm focusing on momentum. And I'm focusing on Leave. I fully expect Leave to pop off in clutch moments in the playoffs, and I think that this match is going to be one of them. I think it's going to be tight, but I don't think that either team will be comfortable enough to counter strat the other team. So I don't think that Guangzhou are going to act to put off the Chengdu Hunters meta that's developed, or Chengdu are going to put off Guangzhou's. What I see is that both of them play to their strengths in a very, very scrappy, tight match. And I've just got this feeling that the momentum coming into this match is with the Chengdu Hunters, and I don't know why I see Leave as having such a pop-off performance when he's going up against Krong on the off-tank. Usually see a lot of interactions between star DPS and opposing off-tanks in trying to shut them down, and Krong's been good all season, but yeah, I think Jinmu's going to be taking away so much attention that Leave is just going to go crazy. This is the biggest upset I've got in my whole bracket. I see it happening. Chengdu over Guangzhou. Don't at me, because this means that Chengdu go through to grand finals, baby. Let's go hunt. Let's go hunt. And we're going to go to grand finals now. We're going to go through our grand finals brackets. First seed in Philadelphia go up against the lower seed in Chengdu. First seed in NA go up against the lower seed in Shanghai, San Francisco Shock. Whilst Chengdu will have been riding the high throughout this early playoffs bracket, momentum will be completely reset. There's 3 weeks between playoffs and grand finals, and any surprise factor or mentality that Chengdu would have been carrying in to grand finals from the playoff in APAC will have been diminished. I think Philadelphia will have had so much time to develop so many ways to deal with whatever hunters might throw at them that Philadelphia have so many more options to take maps than Chengdu do. I think that Philadelphia take an early match on control, and Chengdu see themselves as being a success to get to this point, which obviously it would be, but I don't think they have the same mentality and drive that the other teams in the grand finals do, because Philadelphia want to show that they can win something. Shock want to show that they're the best against Shanghai. Shanghai are trying to come out as the best team in the league and really show up for the Asia Pacific region. Chengdu don't have that drive. I think they'll be the underdogs, but not in the same way as against Guangzhou, where they've got momentum coming into that underdog status. I think that they'll just be happy with how they've been, and once they lose one or two matches, they'll start to see it as, okay, we'll take this last map as a celebration of what we've done this season, and just play for fun. And that's what the Chengdu Hunters do. That's why we all love them, because they play fun Overwatch. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to take them out against Philadelphia Fusion, but that's why I have the matchup going this way. Then Shanghai against San Francisco Shock. I found this very, very difficult to call, but I think that the Shock pick up on metas. There's more of a risk that the Shock don't understand the meta coming into grand finals, given that there's 3 weeks off to change and adapt and review and scrim. The Shock have shown that if they, especially because of the Summer Showdown, where they just didn't understand that Genji was meta, that there's more of a risk of that from San Francisco Shock than Shanghai Dragons. And I think that the Shanghai Dragons being able to play the sort of New York defensive reactionary style actually comes up really well against the Shanghai's high tempo, against San Francisco's high tempo, that they'll be able to... Shanghai have more options to switch it on and off than San Francisco do, that they can bait in San Francisco to make mistakes in their aggression and then capitalize on that, as well as being able to aggress and force mistakes out by putting San Francisco on the back foot. So I think that there's just more options for Shanghai. I don't think that San Francisco have shown that they want to run multiple metas at the same time, whereas Shanghai have shown that they can, which gives them such an advantage in terms of map picks, that even if San Francisco do take maps, Shanghai are there, like, straight away. So yeah, I see this one going to Shanghai, which means that it'll be Chengdu Hunters against San Francisco in the lower bracket, and it'll be the same reasons why Chengdu lost against Philadelphia, they'll lose against San Francisco. There's a difference in quality, there's a difference in mentality. Shock are now in the do-or-die situations in which they clutch out everything. This is where they made their incredible losers bracket run in the 2019 Grand Finals. This is where they have shown that they can come back from losing positions and win. So yeah, I don't think that Hunters really stand a chance against San Francisco, which means that the two first seeds from NA and Asia Pacific go against each other. Philadelphia Fusion against Shanghai. This is going to be an incredibly strange match, and I think this is where we'll actually see Shanghai start to take more of the front foot, where I said that their defensive reactionary capabilities would stand them in good stead against San Francisco Shock. I think that their aggression here will stand them in good stead against Philadelphia Fusion. I think that Philadelphia Fusion like to get engaged in scrappy fights and clutch them out and really sort of bring out duels and 1v1s and allow their own mechanical skill to overpower the opponents. And whilst I don't think there's such a big gap in the mechanical skill between Philadelphia Fusion and Shanghai, I think if you look at Lip against Hisu, who's likely to be in the secondary DPS role, Lip is far more experienced, far more has been in these situations and shown so much more impact in these situations. Fleta against Carpe is interesting. Carpe maybe has an advantage if it's a Widowmaker battle, but Fleta has more flexibility than Carpe, and if there isn't any advantage to Carpe against Fleta, it's lost with Lip against Hisu. Main tanks, I think both of them are not main tank gods in the same way that Gushue and Smurf might be, where they create so much for their team, but what they do is they are so coordinated with their teams that they maximize their impact. So I find both Fearless and Sado very similar, very mechanically good, but not they don't initiate in the same way that a Gushue or a Smurf does. They both play a similar style where they take passive spaces and really coordinate the jump management to take high grounds, that kind of thing. Both of them are more of a space orientated Winston than a sort of pick orientated Winston like a Gushue can be. Off tanks, Void against Fury / Poco. Void is up for MVP. I think that Fury and Poco combined allow a lot of options on different maps, and I like them. And then I think that Fusion actually have an advantage in the support line. I think that Alarm has higher impact and ability to pop off than we see from Luffy. And if Izayaki comes in, then it's more similar, but Izayaki's got issues with ult management and some positioning issues that Alarm just doesn't have. Lee Jae-gan has, again, a similar advantage over Funny Astro in that way, I would also say. So it's very tight in terms of matchup to matchup, but I think just in terms of flexibility, adaptability, Shanghai take this over Philadelphia. Which means that Philadelphia and Shock face each other again in the losers finals in the lead up to the grand finals. And this is where Shock come back. I think that the loss earlier on in the bracket, the fact that they're in like a full do or die situation now, there's not a losers bracket to return to. If they lose this, they're out. And the fact that Philadelphia hasn't really clutched out finals in the past in similar high stakes situations. Just I think San Francisco win the mental battle before the match even starts, and Philadelphia are really worried about their clutch reputation, whereas Shock are propelled by their clutch reputation, which takes this match leading into the grand finals between Shanghai and San Francisco. Now for this you need to guess a score, and I've got like in my head how this will play out. So I've got in my head that Shanghai are actually going to take an early lead against San Francisco, because San Francisco will be prepping their match against the Shanghai Dragons from the first round. But Shanghai Dragons at this point will be able to show their other looks and expect this, and really manage to stun the San Francisco Shock in the early maps by playing something that the Shock aren't particularly prepared to counter, and they'll get off to an early lead, which the Shock will then, after half time, the first two maps, react to really well, and maybe bring one map or two maps back, but then Shanghai will show another look, and just be, they'll have an advantage in their adaptability, as in they're able to play different styles and swap between them a lot quicker than I think the Shock can pick up and really counter. So whilst they'll get, I think the Shock will win sort of the middle portion of the final, I think Shanghai will manage to flip that on its head and take the later maps, and I see it going 4-2 for that reason. If it ends up in a 3-3, I think that the Shock take it just on their clutch factor, but who really knows. But that's why I see the map going 4-2. I think that the San Francisco Shock will be caught off guard by the first look of Shanghai Dragons prepping for what they saw in the first round, and it'll go on from there. But yeah, let me know what you think about the brackets. This is unlikely to be up before the first round, but it'll be up before Chengdu's match on the Friday morning. So yeah, the spiciest take is Chengdu getting this far. I know it's hopeful. I know that it seems like I'm coming from a biased position, being Hunter's EU fan TV, but I backed them in the Countdown Cup to perform well, and they performed well in the Countdown Cup up until Aiting came in. But the reasons why I think Chengdu Hunters will perform well are broken down, I think, by my Countdown Cup review in terms of that dive poke composition that they played really well in Countdown qualifiers, and I break down with Elsa on the Winston from my Who's That Chimp Winston versus Elsa Countdown Cup review video, which you can please check out. Hit me up with a follow on Twitter or subscribe here for more content coming up regarding the playoffs and Hunters in particular. If you want to win $100,000, you can create your own bracket over at overwatchleague.com, brackets.overwatchleague.com, so the top of the screen there, and build your own bracket. If you manage to create a really good bracket, let me know. Let me know your thoughts on this bracket, and yeah, just remember, everyone, let's go hunt.